Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Dan Clark. We are now less than 6 weeks out from this year's elections, and a new poll has Democrats ahead in races statewide, like this year's elections for U.S. Senate and Governor. Governor Kathy Hochul has a 17-point lead over Congressman Lee Zeldin, according to the poll. Though Zeldin has said internal polling shows a tighter race. But one blind spot for Hochul is with independent voters. Zeldin has a 2-point lead there and has more support upstate. Hochul responded to that point on Wednesday.
Certainly independent voters, when the election gets closer, will be very focused on the extreme contrast between two individuals and who is prepared to lead this state into this post-pandemic era. And that person, I believe they'll conclude, is myself, based on my experience.
And a lot more in this week's poll. Let's get into it with Steve Greenberg from the Siena Research Institute. Steve, thank you.
Great to be with you.
So what does this tell us about Kathy Hochul versus Lee Zeldin head-to-head? I just mentioned independent voters. Lee has a 2-point advantage there, but is this race as tight as it usually is around this time for a Democrat versus a Republican in New York?
Well, we have to keep it in perspective. New York is a solidly blue state with more than twice as many Democrats as Republicans. So what we normally see at this time of year, a month, 6 weeks out from an election, is the Democrats having a sizable lead. In this case, not only in the governor's race, where Hochul has a 17-point lead over Zeldin right now, but in the other 3 statewide races, we see Democrats having leads between 16 and 23 points. So what the Republican has to do, what Zeldin really has to do, is he's got to do a better job with independents. He can't just win independents by 2 or 3 points. He's got to win independents big if he wants to be competitive in a state like New York.
And win Democrats, too. I mean, you really have to bring people over to your side of the aisle in a race like this. Have we seen anybody make up this much ground with this short amount of time before Election Day in recent history?
It's tough to do, and it's tough for a Republican. It's why no Republican has won in New York in 2 decades, since George Pataki won his 3rd term as governor in 2002. You know, and Zeldin has another problem, which is Republicans. Right now, he's got the support of 77% of Republicans. 17% of Republicans say they're voting for Hochul. Last month, back in August, or I should say back in August, in the first Siena poll here, Zeldin had the support of 84% of Republicans. So he's losing Republicans, he's not winning enough among independents, and he's not picking off Democrats.
I wonder why that, do you have any insight on why that is? I mean, it's just such a strange set of numbers.
Well, you know, what we also see here is the traditional gender gap.
Yeah.
Men are basically break even. They support Hochul by a handful of points, but women better than 2 to 1. 61 to 29% say they're with Hochul. So in a lot of ways, this is the traditional race we have seen over the last 3 gubernatorial elections. The major difference being that there's nobody named Cuomo on the ballot.
Yeah. Is there anything strange about the other statewide races in terms of the gaps there? It seems like it's all pretty usual where we would be at this point.
Yeah, it really is, and that's because we have 3 incumbent Democrats who are running for re-election, and their 3 Republican opponents are largely unknown to the vast majority of voters. So, for example, Joe Pinion, who's running against Chuck Schumer, 88% of voters have never heard of him or don't have an opinion about him. Same for Paul Rodriguez, who's running against Tom DiNapoli for state controller. And same for Michael Henry. 92% of voters have never heard or don't know enough about Michael Henry, who's running against Letitia James for Attorney General, to have an opinion. So now what we're seeing is sort of a lackluster New York campaign at the statewide level, where the Democrats are in control and the Republicans are trying to sneak in, but losing time.
You know, meanwhile, I found something very interesting about the issues that voters are now finding important. So later in the poll, you ask voters what their big issue is in determining their vote in November. And now we see most voters are talking about the economy, and crime seems to have gone down a little bit. I found that really interesting.
Absolutely. Look, in the spring, crime was far and away the #1 issue that voters were talking about. Now, when we ask voters the top issue that's going to determine how they vote in November, and then the second issue, what we find is half of voters, said economic issues is one of their top issues. 30% said it is the top issue. Coming in second now, threats to democracy. A third of voters say it's one of their top 2 priorities. 22% say it's their top priority. Crime has dropped down now to third. And then you have your second tier issues that are important to segments of the electorate, but not overall. And that's gun policy, abortion, health care. Important to a group of voters, but not necessarily a large group of voters.
And how are we defining threats to democracy? I know that might mean different things to different people.
It absolutely does, and we're not defining it. What we ask voters is that an important issue for you? And so interestingly, what we see is 35% of Democrats say it's one of their top 2 issues. 34% of Republicans say it's one of their top 2 issues. So I think Republicans and Democrats probably come at this from a different point of view, but what is interesting is that you have a sizable number of Republicans, Democrats, and independents who are concerned about threats to the country's democracy.
That's fascinating. That is really interesting. And if we see a question like that again, I would be very interested to see the answer in a couple of years. We are out of time, unfortunately. This is a great poll. Steve Greenberg from the Siena Research Institute, thank you so much.
Thank you.